Divorcing you was the best decision of my life, she laughed into the phone. Hours before marrying a man worth 10 times what I own. I built everything from nothing after she left my shop. My second marriage. My daughter's college fund, while she spent 5 years mocking the life I chose to keep quiet and steady. What she didn't know was that my late father's estate still listed her as a beneficiary. A clause my own mother had never let me remove out of old loyalty. That night, I finally made the call I should have made 5 years ago and set a lawyer loose on a wedding she thought was already won. But let me start from the beginning. Thank you for being here. Before we start, I'd love to know, what are you doing while you listen to this? Cooking dinner? Driving? Maybe just taking a quiet break? Drop a comment and tell me. Your presence here truly matters. Quick note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling, but the heart of this story, the message, is what I hope resonates. The phone rang at 10:15 on a Thursday night, the sound cutting through the stillness of the ranch house like a crack in glass. At 46, I run a small therapeutic riding ranch just outside Las Vegas, where the desert meets the last stretch of open land developers haven't yet touched. Most evenings end in silence. The horses settled, my wife Saskia asleep down the hall. Phone calls this late usually mean trouble. I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. Desmond. Roxanne Mercer. My ex-wife of 5 years. Spoke my name like she'd been practicing how to deliver it casual, but waited. Her voice carried that same edge of triumph I remembered from the day she left. I wanted to tell you something before you heard it from someone else. I set down the ranch expense report and waited. Through the window, moonlight painted the stable walls silver. I'm getting married on Sunday, she continued. To Preston Ashford. You probably don't know who that is. I didn't. Congratulations, I said, keeping my voice flat and controlled. He's a real estate investor, very successful. She paused, and I heard ice cubes shift in a glass. I'm calling because I wanted you to know. Leaving you was the smartest decision I ever made. I just wanted you to know that before I close this chapter for good. Before I finalize everything. Finalize everything. The phrase hung in the air between us, specific and deliberate. What made a decision smart? The choosing. Or what you chose to believe about it afterward? I'm happy for you, Roxanne, I said, meaning none of it. Are you really? She laughed, soft and sharp. Because I'm very happy, Desmond. Preston understands what it means to build a life. To want more than horses and dust and playing cowboy therapist in the middle of nowhere. I could have told her the ranch served 43 children last month. That the therapy program had a 6-month waiting list. Instead, I said nothing. Anyway, another clink of ice. I thought you should hear it from me. 72 hours from now, I'll be Mrs. Preston Ashford. And this part of my life will be completely behind me. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the dark living room, phone still warm against my palm. I felt the past 15 years rearrange themselves. 15 years ago, my grandfather Lawrence Caldwell stood with me in the barn on this same ranch and explained what family meant. He was 78 then. His hands gnarled from 60 years of desert work, his voice still carrying authority. The barn had smelled like hay and summer heat and the particular kind of certainty you only have before you've lost anything that matters. This land stays with family who understand what it means to keep a promise. Des, he'd said, one hand on my shoulder. Not everyone who carries the name deserves to be in that document. I was 31 then, newly married to Roxanne, believing in permanence because I hadn't yet learned the difference between commitment and endurance. I understand, Grandpa. You will. He looked at me with those pale blue eyes that seemed to see futures I couldn't. Someday you'll have to decide who belongs here. He died a year later. The trust documents he'd signed specified the land was for family who understood what it means to keep a promise, not just blood relatives, but people who valued legacy over liquid asset. I hadn't understood the weight of that distinction until Roxanne walked out 5 years ago, demanding her half of everything. Except she hadn't wanted the ranch. She'd called it worthless dirt, told her lawyer it wasn't worth fighting over, and taken cash settlements instead. I'd kept the ranch, the horses, the therapy program that barely broke even, and the daughter she'd decided was too much work to parent from a distance. "Who calls this late?" Saskia appeared in the doorway, backlit by the bedroom lamp, concern in her eyes. At 38 and steady, in a way that made crisis feel manageable. She'd married me 2 years ago, knowing I came with complications, a failed marriage, a daughter who needed patience, a ranch that demanded everything and paid back in meaning rather than money. "Just someone from a long time ago," I said. "Go back to sleep. I'll be there soon." She studied my face, decided to trust me, and disappeared back down the hall. I sat alone in the darkness and let Roxanne's words replay. Finalizing everything. Before I close this chapter for good. 72 hours from now. There are moments when your past and present collide with such force that the impact rewrites your understanding of both. This was one of them. My mother's voice from 5 years ago surfaced. "We don't burn bridges out of spite, Desmond. We'll leave the trust documents as they are. Maybe she'll come back for Saskia someday." I'd been too raw then to argue. Too focused on keeping my daughter fed and safe and unaware of how thoroughly her mother had chosen to leave. The trust documents, naming beneficiaries, specifying inheritance had seemed irrelevant compared to the immediate work of single parenthood. But land has a way of becoming relevant when you're not paying attention. Paradise Valley had been rezoned for commercial development 6 months ago. Property values had tripled overnight. The dirt Roxanne had dismissed as worthless now sat on assessments approaching $3.2 million. And if my mother had been right about Mercy, if we'd never updated those documents, then Roxanne's name might still be listed as a beneficiary on land she'd abandoned, in a trust she probably assumed still carried the value of worthless desert and broken dreams. Standing alone in the dark living room, I felt the pieces shift into a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. My mother's voice from 5 years ago. "We don't burn bridges out of spite, so we'll leave the trust documents as they are." Roxanne's voice tonight. "Finalizing everything before I close this chapter for good." My grandfather's voice from 15 years ago. "Someday you'll have to decide who belongs here." The question was whether that decision had already been made for me, or if there was still time to make it myself. The memory arrived uninvited, the way they always did when sleep refused to come. Roxanne standing in our kitchen 6 years ago, holding her phone like evidence. I'd been trying to answer the question all night. Was there still time to fix what I'd left unfixed? Or had her call been the sound of a door already locked? The only way to know was to remember how that door had been left open. 6 years ago. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening. Roxanne sat at our kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, blue light washing her face pale. Our daughter was asleep down the hall. The ranch accounts were spread in front of me tight, as always. "Do you ever think about what we could have if you weren't so attached to that land?" she asked, not looking up. I glanced at her phone. Instagram. Someone's vacation photos from Santorini. "The ranch is what my grandfather left us," I said. "It's not just land. It's scrubland. Des." She finally looked at me. Something in her eyes already measuring, calculating, finding our life insufficient. "Our friends are buying houses in Summerlin, and we're living like we're broke." "We're not broke. We're building something." "You're building something," she corrected. "I'm just living in the middle of nowhere watching you play cowboy therapist." The questions started small after that. How much was the ranch worth? Had my grandfather left anything else? Could we sell half the acreage? Each question felt casual, but looking back I could see the pattern reconnaissance disguised as idle curiosity. How do you know when someone stops choosing you and starts resenting that they chose you in the first place? 5.5 years ago. Spring arrived, and so did Preston Ashford, or rather, his shadow. Roseanne took a job as a leasing agent at one of his real estate developments. She claimed she needed something that made her feel accomplished. She came home later each evening with stories about his vision, his properties, his understanding of what it meant to build real wealth. "Preston is developing this entire block downtown," she said one night. "That's what real vision looks like." "I'm not Preston," I said. "No." She looked at me with something close to pity. "You're really not." I knew what was happening. I could feel her slipping away into a fantasy of designer handbags and downtown penthouses, chasing a version of herself I'd failed to see. I felt powerless to compete with a dream. She moved out 3 months later. Left a note saying she'd file for divorce, that we wanted different things. She took our daughter with her for a week, then called asking if I could take her full-time because the new apartment didn't allow for a child's chaos. That's when I knew she was already gone. Not just from the marriage, but from motherhood itself. 5 years ago, 1 month after she'd left, we met at Conrad Townsend's office to divide what remained. Conrad Townsend, 54 and the family attorney who'd drawn up the trust documents when my grandfather was still alive, sat across the conference table with the patient expression of someone who'd walked too many people through too many endings. The attorney's office smelled like leather and lemon polish, and the particular kind of failure that comes with signing your name to something ending. Roxanne's attorney laid out the terms. "My client waives any claim to the ranch property in exchange for the cash settlement outlined. She has no interest in undeveloped desert property with minimal commercial value." "Agreed," I said. The ranch was mine anyway, through the family trust, but I was too hollowed out to argue details. Conrad shuffled papers, cleared his throat. "We should discuss the family trust documents that currently list—" "I don't want anything to do with that place." Roxanne cut him off, already looking at her watch. "Just give me the settlement so we can be done." Conrad glanced at me. I said nothing. She signed, I signed. She left without looking back. I thought it was over. 20 minutes later, my mother Lorraine arrived. At 72 and still carrying herself with the straight-backed dignity of a woman who'd spent 40 years at a sewing machine. She wore the navy dress she reserved for funerals and legal matters. As co-trustee, she needed to sign off on the settlement. Conrad raised the issue again. "Mrs. Caldwell, I strongly recommend we amend the trust to remove Roxanne as beneficiary. It's standard practice after divorce. We don't burn bridges out of spite, Mr. Townsend." My mother's voice carried the iron I remembered from childhood. "That document stays as my father-in-law wrote it." "Mom, are you sure?" I started. "I'm sure. This is about principle, not revenge." She looked at Conrad with finality. "Roxanne may realize her mistake. She may want to come back to this family someday. We keep the door open." Conrad tried once more. "The property value could increase if something happens to Desmond before the trust is amended." "Nothing is going to happen to my son," my mother said. "And I won't have him acting from anger. We leave it alone." In hindsight, every moment you don't speak up becomes a decision you have to live with. This was one of those moments. I sat there, too tired to fight, too broken to care about hypothetical futures when my present had just collapsed. My mother believed in mercy. She believed Roxanne would wake up and remember what family meant. She wanted the legal door left open, just in case. So we left it open. We left Roxanne's name exactly where my grandfather had written it, on trust documents that specified inheritance and beneficiary rights to land that my mother genuinely believed might bring her daughter-in-law home. The memory released me back into the present, still standing in the dark living room with my phone in my hand. My mother's voice, "We don't burn bridges out of spite." Conrad's voice, "I strongly recommend we amend the trust." My own silence 5 years ago. Too broken to care about legal documents when my marriage was ending. That silence might have just become the most expensive decision I'd never made. The question was what Roxanne knew, when she'd known it, and whether her call tonight was the opening move or the final one. I couldn't answer those questions standing in the dark at midnight. But maybe I didn't need to. Maybe what I needed was to remember why it mattered. Why the trust, the ranch. The legal documents weren't abstract problems, but the foundation protecting what I'd rebuilt from nothing. Not all the important moments announce themselves with phone calls at midnight. Some arrive on autumn afternoons in a dusty Honda Civic with a grieving widow and a silent child. 4 years ago. October sun slanted gold across the paddock when Saskia Harper pulled into the ranch parking area. She stepped out of a 10-year-old Civic. 34 and wearing grief like a second skin she couldn't quite shed. Holding the hand of a child who'd stopped talking to a world that had taken her father. Juniper Harper. 3 years old with her mother's dark eyes and a silence that felt too heavy for someone so small. Clutched a stuffed horse she'd carried since the funeral 6 months before. I'd been mucking stalls when their car arrived. Still trying to figure out how to fill the hours when you're a single father with a daughter in school and too many memories waiting in empty rooms. I called about the therapeutic program. Saskia's voice carried the careful control of someone who'd gotten very good at not falling apart in public. For my daughter. I saw the bracelet before she explained woven paracord in fire department red and black. The kind they give to widows at memorial services. The firefighter memorial bracelet, I said quietly. I'm sorry for your loss. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Relief at not having to explain. 6 months ago. She hasn't spoken more than a few words since. Juniper stood perfectly still, one hand in her mother's, the other squeezing the stuffed horse's neck. She didn't look at me. Didn't look at the horses visible beyond the fence. Didn't look at anything except the ground. I recognized that stillness. My own daughter had worn it for months after Roxanne left. That careful blankness that comes from not knowing which emotions are safe anymore. Grief has a posture, shoulders that carry invisible weight, eyes that track the ground instead of the horizon, hands that don't quite know what to do with themselves anymore. I saw it in Saskia. I'd worn it myself. Let me show you the horses, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. No pressure, we can just look today. We walked to the fence line. Saskia hesitated when we reached my office, then asked the question I could see cost her pride. The website said sessions are $200 per hour, but I was hoping there might be. I'm on a non-profit salary, and the survivor benefits don't stretch as far as first responder families qualify for reduced rate. I cut in, saving her from finishing. $100, and we can work with your schedule. That's... She blinked rapidly. You don't have to... Yes, I do. I looked at Juniper's small, silent face and remembered being 2 years earlier broken, alone, barely functional. Some debts are paid forward, not back. Every child deserves a chance to heal. The money doesn't matter. Saskia studied me for a long moment, and I saw her recognize something that I understood not from sympathy, but from standing in the same dark place she was standing now. Thank you, she whispered. I led them to the training paddock where Clover stood in afternoon shade, her bay coat gleaming copper in the slanted light. Clovo was 19. Gentle as summer rain, the horse I used for children who needed kindness more than challenge. Juniper, I said, crouching to her level, careful not to force eye contact. This is Clover. She's very gentle. She doesn't mind if you don't talk. She just likes gentle hands and quiet friends. The child didn't respond, but her dark eyes flicked toward the mare for just a second. I opened the gate, brought Clover close to the fence. Horses are mirrors with heartbeats. They reflect what you bring them without judgment, which is why broken people and broken horses understand each other so well. Cover stood perfectly still, patient, her dark eyes soft. "You can touch her if you want," I said to Juniper. "No hurry. She'll wait." Saskia held her breath behind us. I could hear it catch. Hold. The sound of a mother watching her child approach something she's been afraid to hope for. Juniper took one step forward, then another. Her tiny hand extended, trembling slightly, reaching toward Clover's velvet nose. The mare didn't move, didn't startle, just breathed warm and steady against the small palm that touched her. "She's actually touching something," Saskia whispered, tears in her voice. She won't let anyone touch her. Won't touch anything except that stuffed horse. But Sometimes healing doesn't need words," I said, watching Juniper's face transform from blank to wondering. The first spark of interest I'd seen since they'd arrived. Clover shifted her weight, lowered her head, and gently nuzzled Juniper's hair, a tickling, affectionate gesture she reserved for children she trusted. And Juniper laughed. The sound was sudden, startled. Pure a giggle that escaped like it had been trapped for 6 months and finally found a crack to slip through. The little girl's face split into a smile, her hand flying up to touch where Clover's whiskers had tickled her ear. "Horsey tickles," she said, and laughed again. Brighter this time. Saskia's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming freely now, not bothering to hide them. "That's the first time since the day we got the call." I felt my chest tighten. Something that had been locked inside me for years loosening just slightly. Sometimes all it takes is something that doesn't expect anything from you. Juniper giggled again, reaching up to touch Clover's muzzle, and the sound rang out across the paddock like bells, like promise, like the first sign that broken things could maybe, eventually, learn to be whole again. When did I last hear a child laugh on this ranch? In this life I'd built as a monument to what I'd lost, instead of what I might still find. Watching Saskia wipe tears while Juniper's laughter rang out across the paddock, I understood something had shifted. This wasn't a client relationship. This was the beginning of something I'd thought I'd lost the right to want. The question was whether I was ready to risk being whole again. What I didn't know was that Saskia was asking herself the exact same question. She came back the next Thursday. And the one after that. 6 months of Thursdays passed before either of us admitted what was obvious to everyone else. The sessions had stopped being about the horses weeks ago. 3 years ago. Spring turned to summer in the way it does in the desert. Sudden and complete. Heat settling over the valley like a decision being made. Juniper's sessions with Clover became the anchor point of each week. But what happened after was what neither Saskia nor I expected. Coffee at the ranch house kitchen. Versations that stretched longer each visit. Juniper playing in the paddock while 2 people who'd forgotten how to hope practiced the careful art of letting someone in. One Thursday in May. Saskia set down her coffee cup and looked at me with something like confession in her eyes. "I almost didn't come back after that first day," she said quietly. Feeling hope again terrified me more than staying numb. I understood that, bone deep. I waited because I understood. Some things you can't rush. You didn't push. You just showed up. She glanced toward Juniper, who was feeding Clover carrots through the fence with careful, delighted precision. That's what convinced me it was safe to try. Healing wasn't one dramatic breakthrough. It was the accumulation of ordinary Thursdays when someone showed up and stayed. I was learning it was both. Juniper's first laugh had cracked something open. But Saskia's quiet return each week, choosing to risk hope despite the terror, was what actually let light in. By summer, Thursdays had expanded to include dinner. Juniper fell asleep on my couch mid-cartoon more than once. Saskia and I talking low in the kitchen while the child's breathing steadied into sleep rhythms. Saskia's laugh returned in increments, first cautious, then genuine, then frequent enough that I caught myself listening for it. One October evening, watching Saskia carry a sleeping Juniper to their car. I realized I'd been calling them my girls in my head for weeks. The thought should have scared me. Instead, it felt like coming home. November arrived cold and clear. Juniper asked why I didn't live with them. Saskia told me this over coffee, her voice careful but not guarded. I didn't have a good answer, she said. Maybe we should fix that, I said, and watched her face transform into something between tears and laughter. Is that a proposal or a practical suggestion? Both, I admitted. I'm not good at grand gestures, but I'm very good at showing up. She reached across the table and took my hand. That's all, Eid. 2 years ago. Valentine's Day fell on a Wednesday, but we took Juniper out of kindergarten Thursday afternoon and drove to Henderson Courthouse. My mother Lorraine served as witness, holding 5-year-old Juniper's hand while a judge neither of us would remember performed a 10-minute ceremony that felt more real than my first wedding's cathedral production. No reception, no fanfare, just 4 people and a judge. Vows spoken in a hallway that smelled like floor wax and legal documents. Saskia wearing a blue dress she'd owned for years, and me in the suit I reserved for funerals and trust meetings. Standing in that courthouse hallway, listening to a 5-year-old ask permission to call me what I've been hoping to hear for months, I understood that some vows don't wait for ceremonies. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the judge said. Juniper tugged my sleeve before Saskia and I could kiss. Can I call you Daddy now? She asked. Dark eyes serious and hopeful. I knelt down to her level, feeling my throat tighten. I'd be honored if you did. Daddy? She tested, then smiled wide. Daddy, Daddy, Daddy! Lorraine was crying. Saskia was crying. I might have been crying. It didn't matter. What mattered was the small hand that grabbed mine and didn't let go all the way to the car. 6 months later. We made it official in the way the state requires. August heat pressed down on the valley when we returned to family court for adoption proceedings. Conrad Townsend handled the paperwork. The same patient attorney who'd walked me through divorce and trust administration, and now this transforming Juniper Harper into Juniper Caldwell by legal decree. The judge asked Juniper if she understood what adoption meant. She nodded solemnly. It means he's my real daddy forever, she said. Not just pretend. That's exactly right, the judge said, signing the decree. Afterward, in Conrad's office for the final paperwork. Juniper practiced writing her new name in careful block letters while Saskia and I signed forms. Conrad shuffled through his files, pulled out a folder marked with red tabs. While we're updating documents, he said in the tone of someone who'd mentioned this before and been ignored, we should really address the trust situation. Roxanne is still listed. Right, yeah, we'll handle that soon. I was watching Juniper's tongue stick out in concentration as she wrote the C in Caldwell. Today's about her. Desmond, I'm serious, Conrad pressed. The property value has increased significantly. If something happened... Look, she wrote her whole new name. Saskia held up the paper, Juniper's achievement interrupting whatever warning Conrad was building toward. Juniper Rose Caldwell. Perfect. I smiled, took the paper, pinned it to the office corkboard where Conrad usually kept client reminders. We'll frame this one. Conrad sighed, slid the folder back into his briefcase. I'll send you the trust amendment forms, again. Please actually look at them this time. There are moments when you make choices without knowing you're making them, when distraction looks like joy and deferring paperwork seems harmless because you can't imagine the future you're gambling with. Sure, I said, already turning back to my daughter, who was asking if we could get ice cream to celebrate. Send them over. He did. They sat unopened in the bottom drawer of my desk, filed under handle later. The folder marked urgent, gathering dust beside tax documents and expired insurance policies. Watching Juniper practice writing Caldwell in careful block letters. I couldn't have known that the trust document I'd just dismissed updating would circle back 2 years later in a phone call at 10:15 on a Thursday night. Some mistakes you don't discover until they've already happened. But first, there were 2 years of happiness to live through, and one piece of information still lurking that would make everything suddenly urgent. That information arrived 6 months before Roxanne's phone call, but I'd been too happy to hear it. 2 years of ordinary happiness passed the way good things do quietly, almost suspiciously, like waiting for the bill you forgot you'd run up. Juniper thrived. Saskia and I found rhythm in the small rituals of married life. Saturday morning pancakes, evening walks around the property, teaching our daughter to ride the same horses that had taught her to heel. The ranch program grew steadily, waiting lists lengthening, families driving from across the valley for sessions. I thought we'd built something permanent. Turns out I'd just built something visible. 6 months ago. February evening when desert cold settled sharp after sunset, Nina Brennan called. A former colleague from Roxanne's real estate office who'd always seemed uncomfortable with office politics. She spoke with the hesitant tone of someone who wasn't sure if they were helping or overstepping. I probably shouldn't say anything, she started, and I knew whatever came next would be something I didn't want to hear. But Roxanne was in the office last week asking weird questions. I was reviewing grant applications for the therapy program, only half listening. Questions about what? Property valuations. Specifically about Paradise Valley corridor values now versus 5 years ago. Nina paused. She was asking what the ranch property is worth now compared to when you two divorced. And she met with an attorney downtown. I overheard her mention something about old assets and contingent rights. That got my attention. She waived all rights to this place in the divorce. I appreciate the heads up, but there's nothing she can do. Right, of course. Nina sounded relieved to be dismissed. I just thought it seemed odd enough to mention. After she hung up, Saskia looked up from her book. Should we be worried? No, I said. Too confident, already turning back to the grant applications. It's done and legally settled. She's probably just curious. When someone warns you about smoke, how confident do you have to be that there's no fire before you decide not to look at it? Confident enough to ignore it completely. Apparently. 3 months ago. May heat already pressing down on the valley. Saskia spread waiting list printouts across our kitchen table. 17 families. Some had been waiting 6 months for an opening in the program. We've got 17 families on the waiting list, she said, frustration and possibility mixing in her voice. If we expand, we could double capacity. I looked at the names, imagined 17 more Juniper kids carrying silence and trauma, needing what we'd built. Let's do it. This is what Grandpa Lawrence meant, using the land for something that matters. Juniper, 7 years old and helping with dinner prep, perked up. Are we going to have the biggest stable in Las Vegas? Maybe the biggest therapy stable, I said, already sketching expansion plans on the back of an envelope. 6 stalls to 12, a covered arena for year-round sessions, professional lighting for evening programs. The property could handle it. The demand was there. And the trust my grandfather left was meant for exactly this building. Something that served people who needed it. Building something is an act of hope. Protecting something is an act of wisdom. I'd been so focused on the former, I'd forgotten about the latter. Construction started in June. By late July, the expansion was nearly complete. The new covered arena rose against the desert sky. Metal roof gleaming. Professional lighting visible from the highway. Fresh paint brightened the expanded stable. Updated signage at the road entrance announced Paradise Valley Therapeutic Riding in letters you could read from passing cars. Juniper gave tours to anyone who'd listen. 7-year-old pride radiating. This is going to be the biggest therapy stable in the whole valley. David says we can help 20 kids at once now. The contractor called in early August with good news. We're ahead of schedule, You'll be operational in 2 weeks, just in time for fall session registrations, I told Saskia. Watching the sun set over what I'd built, really. The legacy my grandfather started, and I was expanding. From the highway, driving past, you'd see prosperity, investment, success. A therapeutic writing operation that had clearly grown, expanded, thrived. Paternity that wasn't worthless scrubland anymore, but developed. Professional, valuable. I'd been so proud of that visibility. Never once considered who might be watching. Hindsight didn't just show me what I'd missed. It showed me the exact moment I'd chosen not to see it, which was somehow worse. Standing in my living room in the dark. Phone still warm from Roxanne's call. The pieces assembled themselves with brutal clarity. 10:25 p.m. 5 minutes since she'd hung up. 2 years since I'd ignored Conrad's trust warning. 6 months since Nina Brennan had called with smoke signals I'd dismissed as paranoia. Roxanne asking about property values now versus 5 years ago. Consulting an attorney about contingent rights. Calling me 3 days before her wedding to finalize everything, while making sure to mention she was marrying a real estate investor. Someone who'd understand property value. Someone who'd know exactly what Paradise Valley corridor land was worth after commercial rezoning. The expansion. The visible, obvious, highway advertised expansion that screamed, "This property is thriving, invested in, worth far more than 5 years ago." She hadn't been calling to gloat. She'd been calling to confirm I hadn't caught on yet. Nina tried to warn me 6 months ago, I said aloud to the empty room. I called it paranoia. The expansion I'd thought was purely about helping disabled children, my proudest achievement. The thing that made me feel like I was honoring my grandfather's legacy had become her reconnaissance target. Drive past the ranch. See the new construction. Calculate what that kind of investment meant for property value. Confirm the land she'd dismissed as worthless was now worth pursuing. And I'd built it all in plain sight. Proud as a fool putting up billboards. Standing in the dark with my phone still in hand. I understood what I'd been too content to notice. Nina's warning 6 months ago. The expansion project's visibility from the highway. Roxanne's call tonight with its careful phrasing about finalizing everything. She hadn't been circling randomly. She'd been watching, waiting, confirming. And I'd built her a billboard that said worth more than you thought. The only question left was whether I'd figured it out in time to do anything about it. The answers started with finding the proof. The light from my phone screen was the only thing breaking the darkness when Saskia found me standing motionless in the home office. Drawer already open. What's wrong? She stood in the doorway wearing the old t-shirt she slept in, concern across her face. You've been standing here for 20 minutes. I hadn't realized how long I'd been frozen. Roxanne called. Saskia went still in that way she had when processing bad news. Called you tonight. 10:15. She's getting married Sunday. The words felt surreal. She wanted me to know leaving me was the smartest thing she ever did. That's cruel even for... Saskia stopped mid-sentence, her mind jumping ahead. Did she mention the trust? The question hit like cold water. How did you know about the trust? Conrad mentioned it at the adoption. Saskia stepped into the office, closing the door though Juniper was asleep 2 rooms away. I've been waiting for you to update it, but you never brought it up again. There's a particular kind of fear that comes from realizing the ground you've been standing on was never as solid as you thought. It doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in like water through a crack. I thought it was handled 5 years ago, I said. God, I thought it was handled. Saskia crossed to the filing cabinet, put her hand over mine. We need to know for sure. Where are the documents? Under the adoption papers, I think. I started pulling folders, hands less steady than I wanted. Marriage license mine and Saskia's. Juniper's adoption certificate. Her careful signature. Ranch deed, property surveys, insurance policies. All the evidence of the life I'd built after the divorce. All the proof I'd moved on. Created something worth protecting. And somewhere underneath, potentially, the document that said I'd never actually closed the door. It has to be here, I muttered. Folder after folder passing through my hands. Conrad gave me copies when Grandpa died. What will it say if she's still on it? Saskia's voice was controlled, already thinking through scenarios. It'll say I've been protecting my family with paperwork that has a hole in it big enough to drive a lawsuit through. My fingers caught on a manila folder, older than the others. The tab written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Lawrence Caldwell Family Trust. Original. My chest tightened. I pulled it out, set it on the desk. Saskia stood close enough that I could feel her breathing, both of us staring at it.
"Do you want me to look?" she asked.
No. I needed to see this myself. I opened the folder. The trust document was exactly as I remembered, 18 pages establishing the Lawrence Caldwell Family Trust. Designating the property, outlining terms. I flipped past the preamble, past the property description, to page 14. Beneficiary schedule. Her name, right there. Third contingent beneficiary, Roxanne Mercer Caldwell. Primary beneficiary, Desmond Lawrence Caldwell. Contingent beneficiaries in order: 1. Current lawful spouse, currently Saskia Marie Caldwell. 2. All natural or legally adopted children, currently Juniper Rose Caldwell. 3. Other designated individuals, Roxanne Mercer Caldwell. Executed March 2019. Never amended. 5 years of assumption. Destroyed by 3 lines of legal text. Desmond. Saskia's voice sounded distant. I read it aloud, my voice flat. Contingent beneficiaries, Roxanne Mercer Caldwell. Executed 2019, never amended. So if something happened to you, she'd have a legal claim alongside you and Juniper. I set the page down carefully. Or her future children. Third in line, but still in line. Saskia pulled out the desk chair, sat down hard. She knows. She suspects. Nina's warning 6 months ago, Roxanne asking about property values, consulting attorneys. She's been checking. And you never looked. It wasn't an accusation. Just fact that hurt worse than anger. I never looked. I turned the page. Found what I was dreading. Attached with a paperclip was the most recent property tax assessment from Clark County, dated January 2020. Estimated fair market value, $2,600,000 to $3,200,000. Basis for assessment pending commercial rezoning of Paradise Valley Corridor. Comparable sales in newly zoned areas. Property improvements and development. Therapeutic riding facility expansion, noted. How do you protect something when you didn't know it was vulnerable? When 5 years of assuming handled becomes 5 years of being dead wrong. Current estimated value, I said, my voice hollow. 2.6 to 3.2 million. It was maybe 200,000 when we divorced. She called it worthless dirt. Saskia took the assessment from my hand, read it herself. When she looked up, her face had gone pale. She knows, doesn't she? That's why she called. She was fishing. The pieces assembled with brutal clarity. Calling 3 days before her wedding to finalize everything. Making sure to tell me she's marrying a real estate investor. Watching my reaction. And you didn't understand. And I just confirmed I have no idea she's on the paperwork. I looked at the trust document. The property assessment. The adoption certificate visible in the open drawer. She has 72 hours until her wedding locks her into a new financial situation. I have 72 hours to close a door I thought was already locked. Saskia stood, crossed to where I gripped the desk edge. She put both hands on my face, made me look at her. So we close it. Right now, tonight, whatever it takes. holding the document with its assessment showing a number that made my throat tight. I understood exactly what Roxanne had been doing. She'd called not to gloat, but to probe to see if I knew she was still in the paperwork, to gauge my reaction, to confirm the prize was big enough to matter. And I'd given her exactly what she needed. Proof I was completely unaware. The question was whether the legal system moves fast enough to save something when you've spent 5 years assuming it was already safe. I found out fast enough. I dialed Conrad Townsend's personal cell at 11:47 on a Thursday night, knowing lawyers bill by the 10th of an hour and emergencies cost triple. Saskia watched me stare at the number, hesitation visible in how my thumb hovered over the call button. "It's almost midnight," I said. "Call him." Her voice was steady. "If anyone will understand urgency, it's Conrad. We have 72 hours. 72 hours until Roxanne remarried and complicated everything. Every hour mattered. I pressed call. The phone rang once. Twice. Third ring. Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe I should wait until Desmond. Conrad's voice came through clear. Alert. No grogginess. "I was wondering when you'd call." That stopped me cold. "You were waiting." "I saw the Ashford wedding announcement Tuesday. Business section. Papers rustled. He'd been awake, working. Been waiting for you to put it together. You knew she might come after the trust I've known for 5 years. Desmond." A sigh carried through the phone. "I'm the one who tried to get you to update it. Twice." Embarrassment hit hot and sharp. But beneath it ran relief. "She called tonight." "Of course she did." Conrad's keyboard clicked. "Tell me what she said." I laid it out the call at 10:15. The wedding announcement 3 days out. Her calculated phrasing about finalizing everything. Then finding the trust documents with her name still listed. The property assessment showing current value. How do you know when a problem qualifies as urgent enough to wake someone at midnight? Is it when money's involved? When family's threatened? Or when you realize the emergency started 5 years ago and you just noticed? "She called to confirm I didn't know," I finished. I basically handed her confirmation. "We have until Sunday." Sunday's her wedding. Conrad went quiet, calculating. "That's tight, but doable if we move fast." Hope kindled in my chest. "What do I need to do?" "Tell me exactly what the property assessment says." I read it estimated value between 2.6 and 3.2 million. Based on commercial rezoning, comparable sales, the expansion noted as improvement. Conrad whistled low. "That's 4 to 6 times what it was worth at divorce." She dismissed it as worthless dirt. And now she's marrying a real estate investor who'd recognize the potential immediately. More typing. "Here's what we do. I draft an emergency trust amendment tonight. Strip her from the beneficiary schedule entirely. You and your mother sign it Friday morning. We get it notarized and filed same day." That fast? Has to be. Once she remarries Sunday, her legal standing changes. We need this amendment executed and recorded before that wedding happens. Legal protection is like insurance. You think you have it until the moment you need it. And that's when you discover the policy lapsed years ago, and nobody bothered to tell you. "Walk me through Friday," I said, grabbing a pen. "I'll have the amendment drafted by 8 a.m. You come to my office, we review it. Make sure the language is airtight. Then you take it to your mother." He paused. "She signs as co-trustee. I witness both signatures. We get it notarized. I'll have Margaret on standby. Then we file it with county recorder before end of business. Trust is amended. Roxanne's claim is eliminated. Done. So it's possible." "Legally, yes. The amendment process is straightforward when both trustees agree." His tone shifted, became careful. "Practically, that depends on your mother." The hope flickered, dimmed. "What do you mean?" "Desmond, your mother is co-trustee. 5 years ago, I sat in my office and recommended this exact amendment. She refused. Said you weren't burning bridges out of spite. That Roxanne might come back to the family. That keeping legal doors open was about principle. That was 5 years ago. Roxanne's getting remarried. The situation's different. Is it? Conrad's question landed heavy. Your mother's principles haven't changed, and legally, I need both trustees' signatures. If she refuses again, you'd need to petition the court to override her. My hand tightened on the phone. How long would that take? Weeks, maybe months. You'd need to prove she's acting against the trust's best interests. It's possible, but long past Sunday. Long past any deadline that matters. Conrad's voice gentled. She's the key. Desmond, not me. I can draft the perfect amendment, have it ready to file. But if Lorraine won't sign it, we're dead in the water until a judge says otherwise. She holds the veto. My mother, the woman who insisted we not burn bridges 5 years ago. I looked across the office at Saskia, who'd been listening with growing tension. She met my eyes, read the problem there, and her jaw set. What are the chances she'll sign? I asked. That's not a legal question, that's a family one. But Desmond, Conrad's tone turned serious. If you're going to ask her, do it Friday morning, don't wait. Don't give Roxanne time to make a move first. And don't frame it as revenge. Frame it as protecting Juniper's inheritance from someone who walked away from being her mother. Because that's what it is. Because that's what might convince a woman who believes in principle over spite. Your mother loves that little girl. Make this about Juniper, not about Roxanne. Smart. Tactical. True. I'll have the papers ready by 8 a.m., Conrad said. You get your mother to sign them. No signature from her, no amendment. No amendment. Roxanne stays on the trust until a court says otherwise. We hung up. I set the phone down carefully, looked at Saskia, and said what we both already knew. The hardest conversation I had tonight was with my ex-wife. The hardest one tomorrow morning will be with the woman who raised me to believe that spite wasn't something our family practiced. Some bridges need burning. The question was whether I could convince her of that before the Sunday deadline made it too late. I drove to Henderson at 7:30 Friday morning to find out. My mother's front door opened before I could knock, which meant she'd been watching for me, which meant Conrad had called her, which meant this would be even harder than I'd thought. Conrad called last night, Lorraine said, stepping back to let me in. At 72, she still kept her house immaculate. Fresh coffee mixing with lavender sachets. He explained what you need from me. So you know about Roxanne and the trust. I know you want me to undo a decision I made 5 years ago. She gestured toward the kitchen table where 2 coffee cups waited. Come in. Tell me why I should. No pretense, no small talk. She'd been up all night preparing her resistance. Asking your mother to undo her own decision feels like telling her she was wrong the first time. And when you're 46 years old, that feeling doesn't get easier. It just gets layered with more years of owing her everything. I sat, wrapped my hands around the coffee cup. Roxanne called Thursday night. She's getting married Sunday. I know, Conrad told me. Lorraine sat across from me, exhaustion on her face. Preston Ashford, real estate investor. She called to confirm I didn't know she was still in the paperwork. That's not coincidence. Mom, that's strategy. Or maybe she just wanted closure before moving on with her life. Her voice carried doubt. People who want closure don't ask calculated questions about whether you've finalized everything. I leaned forward. She was probing. And when I gave her nothing, she knew she was safe. That I had no idea she was still listed on land now worth well over $3 million. Lorraine's expression tightened. Conrad mentioned the value. Property she called worthless dirt. That she waived rights to. The words came faster. She needs to be removed from that trust, and I need your signature to do it. Today. Before her wedding. Complicates everything legally. before she marries someone who'd recognize an opportunity.
Exactly. Lorraine stood, walked to the window overlooking her garden. Morning light showed every line from years of raising a son alone.
I kept her name on that trust because we don't burn bridges out of spite. That's what I taught you. You also taught me to protect what matters. I stayed seated, kept my voice level. Roxanne isn't family anymore. Juniper is. Roxanne was Juniper's mother. Roxanne abandoned Juniper when her new apartment didn't allow for a child's chaos. Old anger surfaced. She walked away from being a mother. Juniper is Saskia's daughter now. The trust should reflect that reality. When does loyalty to someone who left become liability to someone who stayed? And how do you explain that distinction to the woman who taught you loyalty was non-negotiable? And what if I'm wrong to sign this? Lorraine turned from the window, eyes wet. What if 5 years from now you regret acting from fear instead of principle? Then she got her goodbye. But I'm not gambling my daughter's inheritance on what-ifs about a woman who chose material status over her own child. Lorraine flinched, and I knew I'd landed too hard. But I couldn't afford gentleness when the clock was ticking. Mom, Grandpa Lawrence said something when he established that trust. Do you remember? She closed her eyes. For family who understand what it means to keep a promise. Roxanne broke her promise when she left. She broke it again when she abandoned Juniper. I stood, crossed to her. This isn't spite, it's honoring Grandpa's actual intent. He didn't write that trust for people who carry the name. He wrote it for people who understand what family means. Roxanne proved she doesn't. Your grandfather also believed in second chances. She had her second chance. She's using it to marry a millionaire and potentially come after land she once dismissed. I put my hand on her shoulder. This is about Juniper's third chance at having a father who protects her. Please, Mom, sign the amendment. Let Conrad file it today. Lorraine was silent, staring at her garden. When she spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. I kept her name because part of me hoped she'd come back. A tear slid down her cheek. That your marriage could be fixed. That I'd been wrong about her. I was wrong. You weren't wrong to hope. Mom, you were just wrong about her. She turned, looked at me with eyes that had seen too many people leave. Signing this feels like admitting I wasted 5 years hoping for something that was never going to happen. You didn't waste anything. You protected me from making a decision out of anger, but now we're not angry, we're just realistic. Family principles are supposed to protect you, but sometimes they bind you to people who've already cut themselves free. That's when you learn that honor and self-preservation aren't always on the same side. Lorraine walked to the counter, picked up a dish towel, dried her face with deliberate movements. When she turned back, her expression had shifted. Not decided, but considering. Let me think about it, she said quietly. Come back this afternoon. I'll have an answer then. Mom, Conrad needs the signatures by noon to file today. I said I'll have an answer this afternoon. Her voice carried finality. This isn't a decision I'm making in an hour. You're asking me to admit I was wrong about something I believed was right. Give me until 2 o'clock. I wanted to push. Wanted to explain that every hour mattered, that Roxanne's wedding was 48 hours away. But she was my mother. And I was asking her to betray her own principles. 2 o'clock. I agreed, standing on my mother's front porch in the morning light. I checked my phone. 8:47 a.m. Conrad expected signatures by noon. Roxanne's wedding was 48 hours away. And the woman who held the only signature that mattered had just asked for time to think about whether protecting my daughter was worth admitting she'd hoped too long for a woman who'd never deserved it. Some decisions can't wait for people to be ready. Sometimes you just run out of time to be gentle. Waiting is its own kind of torture when everything depends on someone else's decision. The phone rang at 3:17 in the afternoon, and I'd been staring at it for 6.5 hours. I called Conrad at noon, Lorraine said without preamble. Asked him what happens to Juniper if you die and Roxanne fights this. My hand tightened on the phone. What did he say? He said years of court lawyers, spending Juniper's inheritance arguing about it. Depositions and hearings, and a 7-year-old stuck in the middle. Her voice was steady, decided. I won't let that happen. Come back. I'll sign. I was in the truck before she finished the sentence. 4 o'clock. I pulled into her driveway. She was waiting on the porch, looking older than that morning, but certain. No coffee this time, no sitting down. She held the door open and I followed her to the kitchen table, where she'd laid out notes in her handwriting. A decision mapped out in blue ink. Relief doesn't arrive like triumph. It seeps in like warmth returning to numb fingers, slow and almost painful after hours of holding yourself tight against the cold. Your grandfather said this land was for family who keep promises, Lorraine said, looking at me. Roxanne broke hers the day she walked out. She broke it again when she abandoned Juniper. You're not being spiteful, Mom. You're being wise. I spent 5 years hoping I was wrong about her. She picked up her purse. I wasn't. Where do I sign? Conrad's office. He's waiting. We drove downtown in separate cars. 4:45. We walked into Townsend and Associates together. Conrad met us in the lobby, folder already in hand. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Caldwell, he said, shaking her hand. I have everything ready in the conference room. The amendment was 3 pages. Dense legal language made precise and surgical. Conrad walked us through it. Removal of Roxanne Mercer Caldwell from contingent beneficiary schedule. Confirmation of Saskia and Juniper as sole beneficiaries. Effective immediately upon filing. This amendment removes Roxanne entirely from beneficiary schedule, Conrad said. Clean. Permanent. Effective upon filing. Lorraine read it twice. And she can't contest this? Not successfully. Both co-trustees executing their authority. She has no standing to challenge a trust she was listed on by courtesy. Not right. Conrad looked between us. Any questions before we proceed? I shook my head. Lorraine said, just one. If we'd waited until after Sunday, would this have been harder? Significantly. Once she remarries, her legal status changes. Community property considerations, potential claims about reliance. Conrad's expression was grim. You're doing this exactly when you should. Legal documents are shields made of paper. They only work if you raise them before the blow lands, which means trusting lawyers to catch what you can't see coming. Then let's finish it, Lorraine said. Conrad called for his notary, Margaret Whitfield. The notary public who'd witnessed enough family drama in Conrad's office to keep her expression professionally neutral, verified our IDs and stamped both signatures without comment. 5:15 p.m. Both co-trustees' names in ink, notary seal crisp and official. Conrad took the signed document, scanned it, pulled up the county recorder's electronic filing system. I'm filing this now. It will be officially recorded by end of business today. I watched the progress bar fill. Watched his screen refresh with a confirmation number and timestamp. Filed and timestamped, Conrad said, turning the laptop so we could see. This amendment is now legally binding as of 5:18 p.m., Friday, August 21st, 2020. So it's done. Before her wedding. Before her wedding. Conrad printed the confirmation. She's out of the trust, completely. As of this moment, Roxanne Mercer Caldwell has no legal claim to the Caldwell Family Trust. Lorraine exhaled. Something she'd been holding since morning finally releasing. I felt it too. The tight band around my chest loosening, the weight shifting, lifting. But Conrad wasn't smiling. He closed his laptop, looked at both of us with careful expression. There's one more thing you need to know, he said. Technically, she has 24 hours to contest this amendment if she learns about it before Sunday. It's a narrow window, requires specific legal standing, and frankly, I don't think she could succeed. But the window exists. The relief faltered. You're saying she could still fight this? I'm saying don't tell anyone until after her wedding. Conrad's tone was firm. No calls to relatives, no mentions to friends, nothing on social media. Let Sunday come. Let her marry Preston. Once that wedding happens, the 24-hour window closes, and this amendment is as permanent as legal documents get. When is a victory actually won? When you file the paperwork? When the other side finds out? Or when enough time passes that they can't undo what you've done? You think she'd try something? Lorraine asked. I think you don't give people reasons to act desperate when you're already winning. Conrad handed us copies of the filed amendment. Stay quiet. Let Sunday come. 4 hours from now. This is locked forever. I looked at the timestamp. 5:18 p.m., August 21st, 2020. 2 days before Roxanne's wedding. 2 days before her new life started without any claim to the old one. We'll stay quiet, I said, walking out of Conrad's office into Friday evening traffic. I had what I'd come for, legal protection, filed and time-stamped before Roxanne's wedding. But Conrad's final warning echoed 24 hours where she could still act if she knew. Sunday was 40 hours away. The question wasn't whether I'd won anymore. It was whether I could keep quiet long enough to let her lose. 2 days until her wedding. 2 days of silence. 2 days of pretending the door wasn't already locked. If you're still with me, drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever had to protect your family in silence? Waiting for the right moment. I read every comment, and it means more than you know. And if this story has its hooks in you, hit subscribe now so you don't miss how it ends. Pretending got easier after the first 24 hours passed without incident. Saturday afternoon arrived with the particular quiet that comes after crisis has passed, but before you're sure it's actually over. I was fixing fence posts in the north paddock when my phone rang. Conrad. Amendment recorded Friday evening. No challenge filed, he said without preamble. As of this morning, she's legally out. Permanently. I set down the post hole digger, relief washing through me. So it's done. We're safe. Almost. I want to deliver formal notice tomorrow. At her wedding reception. The relief stuttered. What? Written notice that she's been removed from the trust. Served publicly. With witnesses. Conrad's voice carried the measured tone of someone who'd thought this through. It eliminates any future claim she was defrauded or improperly notified. I walked away from the paddock toward the house, needing privacy for this conversation. You want to hand her papers at her own wedding reception? I want to make sure she can never say she didn't know. There's a difference. Papers rustled on his end. If she finds out later, months from now, years from now, she could claim we hid it from her. That you manipulated the trust while she was unaware. Serving notice publicly, in front of her new husband and 300 guests, eliminates that defense entirely. Somewhere between courtesy and strategy, transparency had become both, and I wasn't sure the difference mattered if the outcome protected what I loved. You're talking about walking into her wedding and serving her legal papers. I'm talking about creating an undeniable record with witnesses. She gets married tomorrow thinking she might still have a claim. Then she gets notice formal. Legal. Witnessed that she doesn't. No ambiguity. No room for future litigation about whether she knew. The logic was sound. The execution felt cruel. Conrad, I can't show up at her wedding. That's vindictive. That's exactly the spite my mother was worried about. Then don't come. His response was immediate, like he'd anticipated this. I'll serve notice as your family attorney. You stay home with your actual family. That's even better proves this is business, not personal revenge. Would that work legally? Better than you being there. Attorney service of trust documentation is standard procedure. You attending personally would look like theater. Conrad paused. Desmond, I'm not suggesting this to humiliate her. I'm suggesting it to protect Juniper. 10 years from now. If Roxanne tries to claim you secretly amended the trust without her knowledge, we'll have a record that she was formally notified at a public event attended by hundreds of people. That kind of evidence shuts down lawsuits before they start. I looked toward the house where Saskia was visible through the kitchen window, helping Juniper with something at the table. My family. The reason for all of this. There's a particular kind of relief in choosing not to witness someone else's loss. Even when you caused it, it doesn't make you innocent, just absent from the moment of impact. Let me think about it, I said. Think fast. Wedding's tomorrow. If I'm going, I need details. I hung up and immediately called my mother. You want my opinion on whether Conrad should serve papers at Roxanne's wedding? Lorraine said before I'd finished explaining. He already called me. Of course he did. He's being thorough. That's what good attorneys do. She sighed, the sound carrying weight. Sending the papers is business. You being there would be theater. Don't give her the satisfaction of seeing you care enough to show up. So Conrad goes alone. Conrad goes as your attorney doing his job. You stay home being a father. That's the difference between protection and revenge. Her voice gentled. We did the hard thing Friday. We admitted I was wrong to Hope, and we fixed it. Now we let the lawyers handle the paperwork. That's all this is, paperwork. Except it wasn't just paperwork. It was the final door closing. The definitive end of any claim Roxanne had to the life she'd walked away from. And she'd find out at her wedding, surrounded by the new life she'd chosen instead. You're sure this isn't spite? I asked. I'm sure you protecting your daughter's inheritance isn't spite. What Roxanne feels when she finds out is her problem, not yours. Lorraine's voice carried finality. Make the call. Desmond. Let Conrad do job. I hung up and stared at my phone for a long moment, then dialed Conrad back. You'll go, I said. I'll stay here. Just handle it professionally. No drama. Where's the reception? The question stopped me. I have no idea. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Preston Ashford's wedding won't be hard to locate. Conrad's keyboard clicked. I'll find it. What time does the reception start? I don't know that either. I'll handle it. More typing. I'll arrive during the reception, find a quiet moment to serve notice. Make sure she and preferably Preston both acknowledge receipt. Clean, professional, witnessed. You won't hear from me until it's done. Attorneys are proxies for the confrontations you're legally entitled to but emotionally incapable of. They keep your hands clean by getting theirs professionally dirty. Thank you, I said, and meant it. Don't thank me. This is what you're paying me for. Conrad paused. Desmond, you made the right call. Protecting the trust was right. Letting me handle the notice is right. And staying home with Saskia and Juniper tomorrow while I do this, that's right too. You're not avoiding conflict. You're choosing where your energy goes. After we hung up, I sat on the porch steps watching evening lights slant across the property. Tom Roxanne would marry Preston Ashford at some venue I'd never see, surrounded by people I'd never meet. And sometime during that reception, Conrad would hand her a manila envelope that proved the door she'd been testing was locked, barred, and welded shut. I wouldn't be there to see her face. But Conrad would be. And that would have to be enough. Hanging up with Conrad. I realized I'd just done something I hadn't managed in 5 years. I'd drawn a boundary with Roxanne that didn't require my presence to enforce. Tomorrow she'd find out the door was locked. Sunday morning would arrive whether I was ready or not. And 300 miles away in a reception hall I'd never see. A woman who thought she'd played the long game perfectly was about to learn the game had ended without her. Sunday morning arrived exactly on schedule, and while I stayed home with Saskia and Juniper, 300 miles away a different story was unfolding. I didn't witness what happened next. But Conrad told me later. And I've imagined it enough times since that it feels like memory. The crystal chandeliers of the Venetian estate cast warm light over 300 guests. And Roxanne Ashford, she'd been practicing the surname in her head all week, stood at the center of it all, champagne flute in hand. Feel the kind of relief that comes after holding your breath for days. She'd made it. Sunday evening, 7 o'clock. The scene, no dramatic revelations. Just a perfect wedding followed by a perfect reception. Exactly as she'd planned. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out discreetly. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on the wedding. Some gifts arrive late. Roxanne deleted it immediately, jaw tightening. Probably one of Desmond's old friends from the ranch trying to rattle her. Pathetic. She dropped the phone back in her clutch and smoothed her dress. Refusing to let anything spoil this, she entered the reception ballroom on Preston's arm, scanning the crowd with practiced casualness. No sign of Caldwell family. No Desmond skulking in corners. No bitter mother-in-law making passive-aggressive comments. Just Preston's friends. His business associates. People who mattered in ways that 47 acres of desert never would. The scent of gardenias from the centerpieces mixed with expensive perfume. A smell Roxanne associated with arrival, not the mechanic shop's oil and metal. Not the modest apartment she'd shared with Desmond during the broke years. This was what success smelled like. During the first dance. Preston's hand firm at her waist. Roxanne seemed to relax into the moment. Or so Conrad told me later. The week had been stressful. That Thursday night call to Preston about Desmond harassing her about old family issues. Watching Preston's face darken with protective anger. His promise to handle it legally if they don't back off. I imagined she'd worried the confrontation might spook him. Make him question whether marrying her meant inheriting drama. But he'd sided with her completely. Told her Desmond sounded bitter and controlling. Said real men didn't cling to failed relationships. That she deserved better than guilt trips from people who couldn't move on. She'd known then that she'd played it right. Preston's hand at the small of her back proprietary. Protective. So different from Desmond's hesitant touch in those final months, when he'd looked at her like he was trying to solve a problem he couldn't name. Preston didn't see her as a problem. He saw her as an asset. A partner. Someone who understood what it meant to build real wealth instead of playing therapeutic cowboy for disabled kids who'd never amount to anything anyway. The best man's toast brought tears to her eyes. New beginnings, he said, raising his glass. Leaving the past behind and building something extraordinary together. Roxanne raised her champagne. Caught Preston's eye across the toast, saw his smile, and felt something like vindication settle in her chest. She'd left the past behind. The modest house near a failing ranch. The husband who'd never wanted more than what his grandfather had left him. The daughter who'd needed too much attention and given too little in return. And I imagine the best part for her, the secret she'd have kept to herself, was that she hadn't entirely left the past behind. Somewhere in Desmond's filing cabinet was a trust document with her name still on it, listing her as contingent beneficiary to land that was probably worth well over $3 million now, with the commercial rezoning. She didn't plan to claim it immediately, maybe not for years. But someday, if Desmond died or the ranch appreciated even more, that little oversight from 5 years ago might turn into a very comfortable insurance policy. She'd made the right choice. The only choice. Women reinvented themselves all the time, new city, new husband, new life. The Caldwells would move on. Everyone always did. Roxanne excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment to fix her makeup and process the wave of emotion the toast had triggered. She stood at the mirror, studying her reflection. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect new life. Saskia crossed her mind briefly. Her daughter's adoption ceremony had been this morning, Desmond making that little girl officially his. I like to think she felt some small pang of something not quite guilt. More like residual attachment to a version of herself who'd tried and failed at motherhood. But Saskia was better off. She'd have stability with Desmond and his new wife. the kind of focused attention Roxanne had never been able to provide. And someday, when Saskia was older and understood how the world actually worked, she'd realize her mother had made the brave choice pursuing happiness instead of settling for obligation. This marriage secured everyone's future. Preston's wealth, her position, and yes, that quiet insurance policy sitting in a trust document nobody had bothered to update. It all worked out. She fixed her lipstick, squared her shoulders, and walked back into the ballroom. A server approached, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ashford, there's someone asking to speak with you. On the terrace." Roxanne's first thought was venue management, some issue with the open bar or the timeline. "Did they say what it's about?" "No, ma'am. Just that he needed to speak with Mrs. Ashford specifically." She glanced at Preston across the room, caught in conversation with his business partners. Perfect opportunity to handle something herself. Prove she was a capable partner who didn't need constant hand-holding. "I'll take care of it," she told the server, already moving toward the terrace entrance. As she walked, smoothing her dress and wearing her most gracious smile, she caught a glimpse of the man through the glass doors. Tall, silver-haired, holding a manila envelope. Something about his posture triggered a flicker of unease, but she pushed it down. She was Mrs. Preston Ashford now. Untouchable. Whatever this was. She'd handle it with the same efficiency she'd handled everything else this week, quickly, quietly, without letting anyone see her sweat. She reached for the terrace door handle, her wedding ring catching the light. Conrad called me from his car at 10:15 that night, his voice carrying the satisfied exhaustion of a mission accomplished. "She read the whole thing right there on the terrace," he said. "Took her maybe 3 minutes. Then her face went white." I'd been pacing the living room for the past hour, unable to settle. Saskia had taken Juniper home earlier. They'd only stayed long enough for that brief, perfect encounter. And now I was alone with my phone and my thoughts. What did Preston do? That's the interesting part. Conrad's turn signal clicked in the background. He tried to comfort her at first, put his arm around her, asked what was wrong. She told him they were just divorce papers, nothing important. But he's not stupid, Des. He saw the Caldwell Family Trust letterhead, saw the filing date Thursday, the day after her little phone call to you. I closed my eyes, picturing it. The pristine white tent, the champagne fountain Roxanne had probably insisted on, the carefully curated guest list of people she wanted to impress, all of it dissolving like sugar in rain. "He figured out the timeline," I said. "Sometimes a lie takes years to unravel." This one took seconds. "Faster than she could spin it," Conrad confirmed. He asked her point blank, "What did you say to Desmond on Thursday?" She tried to laugh it off. Said she'd just called to wish you well. But Preston's face, I was maybe 20 feet away. Pretending to check my phone, his face said he knew exactly what kind of call she'd made. The gloating kind. The kind that comes before someone tries to take something that isn't theirs. I could hear it in Conrad's voice. He was enjoying this. Not in a cruel way. In the way you enjoy watching justice arrive right on time. Dressed in formal wear. Carrying an envelope. Then what? Then he excused himself, very polite, very controlled. Told her he needed to think, that they'd talk later. And he walked out. Out of the reception, out of the entire venue. Conrad's satisfaction was audible. Left his own wedding reception at 10 p.m. with 200 guests still there. I saw him get in his car, that Tesla he loves so much, and drive away. Didn't even loosen his tie. I sat down hard on the couch. I'd imagined many versions of how this would play out, but I hadn't imagined Preston leaving. That took guts. Or anger. Or both. What did Roxanne do? Stood there. Conrad paused, and I heard him pull into what sounded like a parking lot. Just stood there on the terrace, holding that envelope, watching him disappear. Then she went back inside because what else could she do? The band was still playing. The guests were still drinking her champagne. She'd spent, what did you say? Probably 80 grand on this thing. At least, I said. Roxanne never did anything by halves, especially when she was trying to prove something. So she went back to her reception, smiled, laughed when someone made a toast. But people noticed. His voice dropped, conspiratorial. Of course they noticed. The groom was gone. The bride kept checking her phone. And you know how it works at these things. Someone whispers to someone else, who whispers to someone else, and suddenly everyone knows something's wrong, even if they don't know what. I thought about Roxanne in that moment, surrounded by everyone she'd invited to witness her triumph. All those people she'd wanted to show she'd landed on her feet, married up, moved on to bigger and better things, all of them watching her stand alone. How long did she stay? I left around 10:30, Conrad said. She was still there, talking to Preston's mother. That looked like a fun conversation. His dry tone said it had been anything but. The older Mrs. Ashford had this expression like she'd just discovered her son married someone who came with unexpected legal complications. Which was accurate, if understated. Thank you, I said quietly. For doing this, for being there. Des. I've been your family's attorney for 19 years. I've handled your father's estate, your divorce, your mother's trust arrangements, your marriage to Saskia. This, he laughed softly. This was the easiest billable hours of my career. I walked in, handed her an envelope, and watched Karma do the rest. After we hung up. I sat in the dark living room for a long time. Outside, the ranch was quiet. Juniper was asleep upstairs. Saskia was reading in bed, waiting for me. The new stable, the one that cost more than a house, stood silent in the moonlight, its fresh paint gleaming. Roxanne had called Thursday night thinking she'd found a loophole, a way to claw back what she'd walked away from 5 years ago. She'd been so sure, so confident, sure enough to gloat. Sure enough to hint at lawyers and legal options. But she'd miscalculated everything. The timeline I'd filed the amendment within 24 hours. The value she still thought this was about the land I'd owned during our marriage. Not understanding what it had become. And Preston, she'd assume he'd stand beside her, no matter what he learned. Now she was standing alone in a reception hall she'd probably spent months planning, watching her brand new marriage crack before it even began. All because she couldn't leave well enough alone. All because she'd wanted to take something that was never hers. I thought about calling my mother, but it was late. I thought about waking Saskia, but she'd heard enough about Roxanne for one weekend. Instead, I just sat there in the dark, feeling something I hadn't felt in 5 years free. Roxanne could have her reception, her venue, her expensive champagne. She could have whatever remained of her marriage to Preston after tonight. I had everything that mattered. And this time, it was protected. Conrad told me the rest later, after he'd pieced it together from what he saw and what Preston let slip in the parking lot. The moment that changed everything happened at 8:30, while I was at home putting Juniper to bed, reading her the same story about the wild horses she asked for every night. Roxanne had returned to the reception ballroom with Preston, her arm looped through his, her smile fixed in place like a mask. Guests pressed close with congratulations she barely heard. Her mind was still on the terrace, on those papers, on Juniper's casual comment about the stable costing more than a house. Preston introduced her to a tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch. Rox, this is Mitchell Sterling. He's the one who helped me identify the Henderson properties. Lovely to meet you, Roxanne said automatically. Thank you for coming. Preston leaned close. You sure you're okay? You seem distracted. Just overwhelmed, she said. Happy overwhelmed. He kissed her temple and moved away to greet someone else. Roxanne stood near the bar, champagne glass in hand, trying to focus on the music, the flowers, the 200 guests who'd come to witness her triumph.
But her thoughts kept circling back to Thursday night, to the phone call she'd made, to the smugness in her own voice. That's when Mitchell Sterling's voice cut through the noise. He was standing maybe 10 feet away, talking to a cluster of men in expensive suits. Real estate investors. From the look of them, the kind Preston cultivated. The rezoning approval came through in June, Mitchell was saying. Anyone holding acreage in that Paradise Valley Ranch corridor just hit the lottery. Roxanne's hand tightened on her glass. What are we talking, residential to mixed-use commercial? Another man asked. Full commercial, Mitchell said. Properties that were valued at $20,000 per acre are now pushing 60, 70. Some with mineral rights even higher. Paradise Valley Ranch area. The words cut through the champagne fog like glass. Roxanne knew that name. She'd heard it before. Years ago, when Desmond first mentioned expanding his therapeutic riding operation. She'd dismissed it as middle of nowhere, worthless rangeland. 47 acres of nothing, hours from anything that mattered. Northwest corridor, Mitchell had said. Past the 95. That was exactly where Desmond's ranch was located. Timeline on development, one of the investors asked. Already starting, Mitchell said. Commercial plaza broke ground in July. Medical complex planned for fall. The whole area's transforming. I told Preston last month if he knew anyone sitting on land out there. Now's the time to move. Roxanne set her champagne down before she dropped it. Her hands had gone numb. 47 acres. Desmond had mentioned the exact number once, during the divorce proceedings. When her attorney asked about real property, she'd barely paid attention. Land in the middle of nowhere, worth maybe $200,000 total. Not worth fighting over when she could take a lump sum and be done with him. But if it had been rezoned, if it was now commercial instead of agricultural. She did the math in her head. 47 acres at $60,000 per acre. That was $2.8 million. At $70,000, $3.2 million. And that was just the land. Before the business assets, before the improvements, before whatever else Desmond had built in the 5 years since she'd walked away. The therapeutic riding operation. The new stable Juniper mentioned. The facility that probably brought in revenue now that the area was developing. Now that there were people nearby who could afford equine therapy for their children. How long had he known that? How long had Desmond sat on that information while she demanded her fair share? While she negotiated her settlement, while she signed away any future claim to his assets? June, Mitchell had said. The rezoning came through in June. But when had the applications been filed? When had the plans been announced? How long before June had developers been circling? Had people in the know started buying up land in that corridor? Mrs. Ashford, you look like you've seen a ghost. Mitchell Sterling was looking at her, concerned. She realized she was staring at him, her face probably white. Just too much champagne on an empty stomach, she managed. Excuse me. She turned away, aiming for the corridor that led to the powder rooms. Preston intercepted her halfway there. Rox, seriously, what's going on? You've been off since that lawyer showed up. I'm fine, she said. I just need a minute. Please. She pulled away before he could stop her, before he could see her hands shaking, before the composure she'd been holding with both fists could crack completely. The powder room was mercifully empty. Roxanne locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard, or so I picture it. Piecing it together from what Conrad and Preston told me after, I imagine her doing the math over and over. $3 million. Minimum. Possibly closer to 4, depending on the mineral rights, depending on what else Desmond had developed, depending on a dozen factors she hadn't known to ask about 5 years ago. She'd walked away from generational wealth. She'd taken a settlement of $300,000, a tenth of what the property was worth now, because she'd been so eager to be done with him, so sure she was getting the better deal. And 20 minutes earlier, she'd received legal notice that even that door was closed now. Desmond had amended the trust, filed it Friday.
The day after she called him. The day after she'd been stupid enough to gloat. He'd known she was coming. He'd known what she wanted, and he'd locked her out within 24 hours. Conrad said that when Preston found her 15 minutes later. She was still in there, phone in hand. Wedding makeup perfect, dress flawless. Searching Nevada Trust Amendment challenge, legal grounds, with shaking hands. Still calculating everything she'd lost. Conrad called me at 9:15 Sunday night, after he'd finished the second delivery. She was in the powder room for 20 minutes, he said. When she came out, waiting. I'd told him to wait, to make sure she understood this wasn't just a warning shot, that we'd thought this through, that every door she might try to pry open had already been locked from the inside. How did she react? Like someone who'd just realized the hole she's in is deeper than thought. Conrad's voice carried the satisfaction of a chess player announcing checkmate in 3 moves. She saw me and her face went white. Again. He'd introduced himself as Conrad Townsend, senior partner at Reeves & Townsend, the firm that had handled my family's legal affairs since before I was born. The same firm that had drafted my father's will, my mother's trust arrangements, my divorce settlement. The same firm that had filed the amendment Friday afternoon, within 24 hours after Roxanne's gloating phone call. What did she say? Tried to claim harassment. Said your associate had already served her. She got the papers. We needed to leave. Conrad paused. That's when I told her there'd been a subsequent development. Subsequent development. The words had the clinical precision of a scalpel. Preston showed up then. Conrad continued. Must have followed her from the ballroom. He went straight into protective mode, demanded to know who I was, why I was harassing his wife on her wedding day. Very noble, very misguided. I could picture it. Preston in his tuxedo, all righteous indignation, defending Roxanne from the lawyer she'd brought on herself, not knowing she'd spent the past hour calculating how to steal from my family, not knowing she'd married him the same week she'd lost access to millions. What did you tell him? The truth. That I was providing routine legal notification regarding trust matters. That Nevada law requires timely service of certain documents. Very calm. Very professional. Conrad's tone suggested he'd enjoyed every second. Roxanne jumped in fast. Told Preston it was just divorce paperwork. Nothing to worry about. But he's not stupid. Des. He saw my firm's name. Saw the words Caldwell Family Trust on the letterhead. And then I gave her the second envelope. That had been my idea. The trust amendment was defensive. It protected what we had. But the probate court filing was offensive. It put on record, officially and publicly, that Roxanne Mercer Ashford had no claim, no right, no standing regarding any Caldwell family assets. If she wanted to fight, she'd have to do it in open court, with her new husband watching, with her lies exposed. I explained it was a notice of declaration filed with Clark County Probate Court, Conrad said. That she had 30 days to file any counterclaims if she wished to contest. Preston's face when he heard probate court des. It was like watching someone realize the person they just married is a stranger. There was no easy way to explain to a new husband that you'd married him the same week you lost $1 million inheritance. He asked her what I was talking about, Conrad said. Said he thought her divorce was finalized years ago. She tried to deflect. Said it was complicated. Asked if they could discuss it somewhere private. But the damage was done. I could see it in his eyes. What's in his eyes? Math. Conrad let that sit for a moment. He's a real estate developer, Des. He knows how to read a timeline. She called you Thursday, you filed the amendment Friday, she married him Sunday. Those dots aren't hard to connect. I thought about Thursday night, about Roxanne's voice on the phone, so sure she'd found an angle, so confident she could walk back into my life and take what she wanted. She'd hung up thinking she was 3 steps ahead. She'd been 3 steps behind the entire time. People were watching, Conrad said. We were in the corridor, but it's visible from the ballroom. I saw that real estate investor Sterling, the one Preston introduced her to earlier, pull out his phone. Saw clusters of guests whispering. Her perfect reception was turning into a spectacle. That should have given me more satisfaction than it did. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of Roxanne. Tired of her schemes. Tired of spending my daughter's bedtime on the phone with my attorney instead of reading her stories about wild horses. How did it end? I handed her the envelope. Wished them both well in their marriage, and left, professional to the last second. Conrad's voice softened slightly. Preston took her elbow, not gentle, not rough, just firm, and steered her toward one of the private terrace doors. The weight of his stare, dead if looks could demand explanations. She was about to give a dissertation. I could see it. Preston Ashford, successful developer, careful investor, meticulous planner. The kind of man who built his wealth through due diligence and risk assessment. Finding out his brand new wife had concealed ongoing legal entanglements with her ex-husband's family trust. Finding out she'd been served legal papers twice in one evening at their own wedding reception. Finding out she'd lied. The guests, still watching when I left. Sterling had his phone out. A few others, too. By tomorrow morning, everyone in their social circle will know the bride received legal documents at her own wedding. Conrad paused. Her reputation just became a liability to his business relationships. The weight of Preston's stare felt heavier than both envelopes combined. Thank you, I said quietly, for handling this. For being thorough. Des, I've known your family since you were 16. Your father trusted me with his estate. Your mother trusts me with hers. You think I'm going to let your ex-wife walk in and gut everything we've built? His voice hardened. The court filing stands. If she wants to fight, she can explain to a judge why she waited 5 years and a remarriage to suddenly discover she had claims. Let's see how that plays. After we hung up. I sat in the dark living room, listening to the ranch settle around me. Upstairs, Juniper was asleep. Saskia was reading. The stable stood quiet in the moonlight. Roxanne was on a terrace somewhere, holding 2 envelopes, watching her second marriage crack before the reception ended, trying to explain to Preston why she'd kept secrets, why lawyers kept appearing, why her past wouldn't stay buried. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. I didn't learn about the terrace conversation until later. Pieced together from things Conrad observed and things Preston himself said when the lawyers got involved. But I knew enough that night to picture it. Preston closing the door on 300 guests. The music fading, leaving only the sound of Roxanne's breathing and the envelope trembling in her hand. No more lies, Preston said. His voice had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. What is probate court doing involved in a finalized divorce? It's complicated. Roxanne's deflection was automatic. There were some shared assets we didn't fully open the envelope. Now, or I will. She opened it. Conrad had drafted the declaration himself, every word chosen for maximum clarity and minimum ambiguity. Clark County Probate Court letterhead. Normal notification of beneficiary removal from the Caldwell Family Trust. The legal language was precise, clinical, devastating. Declaration of beneficiary removal, Roxanne read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Caldwell Family Trust. Preston moved closer, reading over her shoulder before she could stop him. Beneficiary you were a beneficiary of a family trust. It was nothing. A small inheritance thing. It doesn't matter. But Preston was already reading ahead. And the words on that page mattered very much. Caldwell Family Trust. The word sat on the page like an accusation. Conrad had included the reasoning in the declaration, the way we'd discussed. Not just the removal, but the grounds.
My mother had insisted on it. If Roxanne wanted to fight, she'd have to fight the record we'd created. A permanent legal document explaining exactly why she no longer had any claim to our family. Preston read it aloud, his voice flat. Removal effective August 21st, 2020. Grounds beneficiaries demonstrated prioritization of material status over family relationship and abandonment of familial duties in pursuit of financial advancement. Through alternative marriage. The silence that followed must have felt like falling.
That's not their lying.
Roxanne's voice had gone thin. Desmond is bitter and he's August 21st. Preston wasn't listening to her denials. He was doing the math. That's Friday, 2 days before our wedding. I imagine he looked at her then. Really looked at her. Seeing past the wedding dress and the makeup and the performance she'd been maintaining all night. Seeing the calculations underneath. Preston flipped to the next page. Con had attached the trust documentation standard procedure for beneficiary notifications, showing what assets were involved. What the removed party would no longer have access to. The ranch property listing, the acreage, the commercial zoning status, the mineral rights, the business operations, and the valuation $3.2 million. $3.2 million, Preston said quietly. The kind of quiet that comes after shock, when your voice doesn't have enough air behind it to be loud. Each line Preston read felt like another layer of skin peeling back, exposing what she'd hidden. I didn't know it was worth that much, Roxanne said quickly. I swear the rezoning just... When did you know? Preston's voice was still controlled, still measured. But Conrad said you could hear the anger underneath like ice cracking. When did you find out what you lost? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer, probably. Because any answer would confirm what Preston was already thinking. He'd met Roxanne 8 months ago at a charity gala. According to the background Conrad had pulled when this all started. They'd dated for 6 months. He proposed in June, the same month the commercial rezoning approvals came through for the Paradise Valley Ranch corridor. Though Preston wouldn't know that connection yet. She'd said yes immediately. They'd planned a quick wedding, August. Intimate but elegant. Except it wasn't intimate anymore. 300 guests. The Venetian estate. $80,000 in flowers and champagne and a band that probably cost more than most people's cars. Roxanne had wanted witnesses. She'd wanted proof. She'd wanted everyone to see her land on her feet. Marry up. Move on to something better. And all of it happened the same week she lost access to millions. Preston looked at his bride. Because that's what she was, legally, as of 36 hours ago, and asked the question that would crack everything open. Did you marry me because you lost this? The silence stretched. Conrad, watching from inside through the glass doors, said Roxanne opened her mouth twice before any sound came out. No, Preston. I love you. This isn't... You called me Thursday night. Preston's voice had gone very calm, the kind of calm that comes when you're putting pieces together and don't like the picture they make. You said Desmond was harassing you. Was he telling you about the trust? Thursday. Sunday. 3 days. The math was simple and damning. I'd filed the trust amendment Friday afternoon. Roxanne called Preston Thursday night claiming I was harassing her. Sunday she married him. At a wedding that cost more than some people's houses. In front of everyone she wanted to impress. The timeline told its own story. It's not like that, Roxanne said. But her voice had lost its conviction. I wanted to marry you before all this. You know I did. The timing was just... Convenient, Preston stepped back, still holding the papers. You lost $3 million on Thursday and married me on Sunday. That's not timing. Roxanne, that's calculation. I love you. Do you? He wasn't shouting. Conrad said that was the worst part. How quiet Preston stayed through all of it. Or do you love what I represent? Security. Status. A backup plan when the Caldwell fortune got locked away. Roxanne reached for him, but he moved back, putting space between them. He set the papers down on the terrace railing, his hands precise and controlled, and pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Her voice cracked on the question. Preston didn't look at her when he answered. "Calling my attorney. If this marriage was entered under false pretenses, I need to know my options." Conrad said he could hear Roxanne from inside, even through the glass. The sound someone makes when they realize they've lost everything. Twice in 1 week. And the second loss is the one they caused themselves. Preston didn't dial. Conrad told me he just stood there with the phone in his hand for 30 seconds, then lowered it and turned to face Roxanne. "When were you planning to tell me?" His voice came out quiet, almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. "Tell you what, that you were on your ex-husband's family trust, that you stood to inherit millions, that you lost it 4 days ago." Preston's tone stayed level. "When were you planning to mention any of it?" "It didn't seem relevant. I thought that part of my life was over." $3 million doesn't seem relevant. Or did it only start mattering on Thursday? Roxanne opened her mouth, closed it. "I didn't think we were building our own life together. Your money, my money, it didn't matter. Except you had a lot more money than I knew about." Preston's voice stayed quiet. 6 months together. You moved in. We got engaged. You never once mentioned you were on your ex-husband's family trust. Because it wasn't mine. It was his family's. I didn't want you to think I was... Think you were what marrying me as a backup plan? The silence stretched. Every memory was rewriting itself in real time. Romance becoming calculation. Preston had told Conrad about the relationship later, when timelines mattered. They'd met in December, dated in January. By July, she was pushing for a wedding date. "You pushed for August," Preston said. "We've been dating 6 months and you wanted to get married immediately. You said you didn't want a long engagement, that we should seize happiness while we had it. Because I love you. Because I wanted to start our life together. Or because you knew the rezoning was coming. Knew the trust value was about to explode. Knew you'd lose it and needed a safety net in place before it hit. That's not I didn't know about the rezoning until... Until when? Until Thursday? Until you lost it? Or until tonight when Sterling mentioned it at our wedding?" She didn't answer. Preston kept going, each memory clicking into place with horrible clarity. "I wanted a prenup. Remember in July? My attorney recommended it, standard procedure for second marriages, and you cried." Roxanne's face went pale. "I was hurt. You were saying you didn't trust me. You said you weren't marrying me for my money, that asking for a prenup meant I didn't believe in us." His laugh was bitter. "You were already on a multi-million-dollar trust. Why would you care about a prenup unless you knew you were about to lose it?" Every piece of evidence in front of him suggested transaction, not love. And there was no way for her to prove otherwise. I didn't, Roxanne's voice shook. "I was trying to protect our relationship. Prenups are cold. They assume failure. And yet, here we are. 2 days married and I'm calling my attorney. Please don't." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "I know how this looks, but I swear my feelings are real. The timing is just..." "Thursday night. You called me upset. Do you remember?" Conrad had the phone records pulled. Later, Roxanne called Preston at 9:47 Thursday. Talked for 38 minutes. "You said Desmond was harassing you, that he was bringing up old family stuff, trying to hurt you. You asked if I would protect you from your past. He was being cruel. That was the night they removed you from the trust. You got the news and immediately called me to make sure I was still locked in for Sunday. To make sure your backup plan was secure. It wasn't like that. What was it like? Then explain it to me. Because from where I'm standing, you lost millions on Thursday and married me on Sunday. And you're asking me to believe that's coincidence. I love you." Her voice was desperate now. "I do.
The timing looks bad, I know it does, but I genuinely love you. I would have married you regardless of the money. Would you? Preston's question was soft. If you'd kept the trust, if you were still looking at inheriting millions, would you be here? Would you have pushed for August? Would you have cried about the prenup?
Yes,
She stopped, swallowed. I think so. I think so. 2 words that destroyed everything. Preston just stared at her, waiting for her to correct herself, to sound certain. But Roxanne had gone quiet, and the uncertainty on her face said she was asking herself the same question. Would she have married Preston if she'd kept the trust? Or would she have stayed engaged, waited to see if something better came along? She didn't know. And that not knowing was the answer. Preston picked up the court documents from the railing, folded them precisely the way he probably folded contracts, business proposals, things requiring careful handling, and slid them into his jacket pocket. When he looked at Roxanne again, his face had gone carefully blank. Conrad recognized the expression from business negotiations. The look Preston got when he'd already decided to walk away but was being professionally courteous. We should get back to the reception, Preston said. People will talk if we're gone too long. Roxanne stared at him. That's it? We're just going to go back and pretend we're going to finish our wedding reception like adults. And tomorrow we'll deal with lawyers. But tonight, we smile for the guests and get through this. He walked to the terrace door and held it open. Roxanne followed because what else could she do? They walked back into the ballroom from opposite entrances. Preston from the main corridor. Roxanne, 30 seconds later, from the terrace. Anyone paying attention would have noticed they didn't look at each other. Preston moved through the crowd accepting congratulations, but his responses were mechanical, brief. A handshake here, a nod there. When guests asked about the honeymoon, he deflected. When Roxanne tried to join him, he smoothly stepped away, maintaining distance. You two must be so happy, someone said. When do you leave for Maui? We're still finalizing plans, Preston said. Excuse me. Roxanne caught his arm. Preston, we should... He turned, his smile perfectly calibrated for the audience watching. I need to speak with Mitchell. Alone. She let go because what else could she do with 300 people watching? The guests started noticing within minutes. The groom moving one direction, the bride another. The careful space Preston maintained between them. The way he checked his watch twice in 5 minutes. Mitchell Sterling stood near the bar with a cluster of investors, the same men who'd discussed the Paradise Valley rezoning earlier. They watched Roxanne with expressions that had shifted from celebration to speculation. Did you see the attorney? One of them murmured. Not quite quiet enough. Served her papers at her own wedding. I heard it's about money from her first marriage, another said. Trust fund or something. Preston looked furious on that terrace. The ballroom had become a stage where everyone knew their lines except her. Roxanne approached a group of women she'd met through Preston. Tried to smile. Tried to pretend everything was fine. Having a good time? They exchanged glances. Oh yes, lovely. We were just getting more champagne. They scattered. Conrad moved closer, staying at the edges, watching. He'd seen social circles turn before, the way information spreads through a crowd like ink in water. Invisible at first, then everywhere. The whispers multiplied. Roxanne felt the temperature shift, saw people watching her with curiosity instead of celebration. Eyes that had admired her dress now assessed it differently. Calculating what it cost, wondering if it was Preston's money or desperation. She'd wanted to be seen. She'd wanted everyone to witness her triumph. Her proof that she'd landed on her feet. Married up, moved on to something better. Now they were watching her unravel instead. Preston found her near the dance floor at 9:55. From a distance it probably looked intimate, the groom leaning close to his bride, speaking quietly near her ear. Up close, Conrad said. You could hear the ice in his voice. I'm leaving. You should stay. Finish hosting. It would look worse if we both disappeared. Roxanne's face went pale. Preston, please. We can talk about this at home. Don't leave me here. I need time to think about what else you haven't told me. He straightened, putting distance between them. Smile. People are watching. Married less than 48 hours, and he was already calculating the exit. Preston, stay. Host. Maintain appearances. His voice stayed low, controlled. We'll talk tomorrow, with attorneys present. He walked toward the exit, stopping to shake hands with a few key guests. Professional, courteous, offering brief excuses about an early obligation. Take care of things here, he said to Mitchell. I'll call you tomorrow. Mitchell's expression was careful. Everything okay? No. Preston's answer was quiet, honest. But it will be. Roxanne stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom as her husband walked out of their wedding reception. The band was still playing, the champagne fountain still flowing, the flowers still perfect in their arrangements. But conversations had paused. People noticed. Is the groom leaving? Someone said, not quite whispering. The bride is still here. Conrad watched Roxanne's face as she realized what was happening. This wasn't Preston stepping out for air. This was abandonment, public, calculated, deliberate. He'd instructed her to stay, to finish hosting alone, to stand there in her wedding dress while 300 guests watched her husband leave. The venue she'd chosen for this, the Venetian estate, expensive and elegant and impressive, had become the site of her public humiliation. The Venetian estate. She'd chosen it specifically to be seen, admired, envied. Now she was just alone. She tried to recover, tried to smile at nearby guests. He just has an early meeting tomorrow. He'll be back. Of course, someone said, backing away. Excuse me. No one believed her. Conrad could see it in their faces, in the way they avoided direct eye contact, in how conversations resumed but quieter, charged with gossip. He caught fragments as he moved through the crowd. Trust fund from the ex-husband. $3 million. I heard, poor Preston. You can see it on his face. Married him for the money, and everyone can see it now. How embarrassing. Roxanne stood in the center of the ballroom, her wedding dress suddenly looking costume-like. Too white, too formal, too much. The guests flowed around her, like water around a stone. Conversations continuing, the party going on. But she was separate from it now, isolated at her own reception. Conrad watched for another few minutes, then quietly excused himself. He'd seen enough. Mission accomplished wasn't quite the right phrase. This wasn't victory, exactly. But justice had been served. And sometimes justice looks like a woman standing alone in a ballroom full of people who were supposed to be celebrating her. He called me from his car at 10:15. It's done, he said. Preston left 20 minutes ago. She's still there, trying to pretend everything's fine. But everyone knows. You can see it. How did she look? Conrad was quiet for a moment. Destroyed. Exactly the way she wanted you to feel when she called Thursday night. A server approached Roxanne tentatively. Conrad saw this before he left and asked if she'd like them to begin wrapping up the reception early, given the circumstances. She stared at him, realizing even the staff could see her humiliation. Through the ballroom windows, she caught a glimpse of taillights leaving the parking lot. Preston's car, disappearing into the Vegas night, leaving her alone at her own wedding. Everything she'd wanted. The venue, the guests, the witnesses to her success had become evidence of her failure. I sat in my dark living room, phone in hand, and felt nothing but relief. It was finally over. Conrad's call came on a Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after Roxanne's wedding. And I knew before answering it would be good news, not because I'm psychic, but because bad news never waits for business hours.
Preston Ashford filed for annulment Wednesday, Conrad said. Grounds, fraud. Material misrepresentation of financial circumstances and motivations. I was in my office. Paperwork spread across the desk. That was fast. 3 days after the wedding. His attorney is very thorough. The court filing includes sworn statements from multiple wedding guests who witnessed the document service. Mitchell Sterling gave a particularly detailed account. How's it looking? Clark County courts are expediting it. Given the circumstances, the timeline, the documented deception, the witnesses, it should go through without issue. 3 days. She'd been married for 3 days before he filed for annulment. I should have felt triumph. But mostly I just felt tired relief. Like setting down a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there. There's more, Conrad continued. Roxanne's attorney sent 3 separate inquiries about contesting the trust removal. Claims of undue influence, improper timing, lack of adequate notice. All fail on the merits. She's still trying to fight this. Was trying. Past tense. Conrad's satisfaction was audible. Here's the beautiful part. Her attempt to remarry Preston actually strengthened our case. The court filing cites her demonstrated prioritization of material status over family relationship. Her calculated timing proved exactly what we documented as grounds for removal. I closed my eyes, remembering Thursday night. Roxanne's voice on the phone, so sure she'd found an angle. She'd handed us the evidence we needed. Her attorney withdrew representation Friday, Conrad said. Sent formal notice that he could not in good conscience continue pursuing claims without legal merit. The case is closed. The trust is secure. And Saskia and Juniper's interests are fully protected. Thank you. For all of it. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet office, just breathing. It was really over. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. I found Saskia in the kitchen, making pancakes for Juniper, who was coloring at the table. Conrad called, I said. Saskia looked up, reading my face. And Preston filed for annulment. Roxanne tried to contest the trust removal but failed. Her attorney withdrew. It's over. We're safe. Saskia came to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. I held her, feeling something in my chest finally unclench. So it's really over. She can't touch the trust. It's over. The trust is secured for Juniper. For any future children we might have. For generations. Saskia pulled back. I'm glad. But I'm also sad for Juniper. She deserved a mother who chose her. I glanced at our daughter, bent over her coloring book. 7 years old and already more loved, more secure than Roxanne had ever made her. She has a mother who chooses her, I said quietly. Every single day. Saskia's eyes filled, but she smiled. Yeah, she does. Saskia was right. Juniper deserved better, and we'd made sure she had it. Weeks passed. Summer faded into autumn. The therapeutic riding program expanded. Juniper started first grade. Life moved forward. 3 months after the wedding, word filtered back. Mitchell Sterling mentioned it at a charity event in November. Carefully, watching my reaction. Said he'd heard Roxanne was working at a mid-tier property leasing office in Henderson. The annulment had gone through in September. Preston had cut all ties, made it clear to their mutual acquaintances that her name wasn't to be mentioned. She'd moved from her upscale apartment to a modest place. The high-status life she'd chased had dissolved completely. I thanked Mitchell for letting me know. Not because I wanted to gloat, but because closure requires information. Driving home that evening, I realized I felt nothing about Roxanne's circumstances. Not triumph, not vindication, not even pity. Just peace. She'd chased status and lost everything. I'd protected family and kept everything that mattered. Justice hadn't needed my anger. It had needed my patience and precision. That weekend, I watched Juniper at the stable with Saskia, learning how to brush one of the therapy horses. The new stable gleamed in the November sunlight. The ranch was thriving. The trust was protected. My family was secure. Juniper looked up. "Daddy, can we get ponies like I told that lady at the wedding?" I smiled. She barely remembered that evening, just a vague recollection of a fancy party. "Maybe next spring, sweetie. We've got plenty of horses to take care of first." "Okay." She went back to brushing. Humming. Saskia came to stand beside me. "You did the right thing. All of it." "We did the right thing." I corrected. "You signed those papers too. You trusted me when I said we had to move fast." "I always trust you." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "That's what family does." Roxanne had become a cautionary tale in Preston's social circle. The woman who married for money and got caught. Meanwhile, my life had moved forward. The therapeutic riding program was helping kids. The ranch was expanding. Juniper was thriving. Justice had served itself. That evening, Conrad called again with one final update. "Roxanne signed formal relinquishment documents this afternoon," he said. "Complete waiver of any future claims to the Caldwell Family Trust." Preston's attorney required it as a condition of dropping a fraud countersuit. She signed, put her name on paper, notarized, filed with the court. It's permanent now. What her choice is already decided. She's made legally binding. I looked out my office window at the ranch, at the horses in the pasture, at the stable where Saskia and Juniper were finishing evening chores. "It's truly over," I said. "It's truly over," Conrad confirmed. And for the first time in 5 years. I believed it. The new stable smelled like pine shavings and possibility. And Juniper's laughter echoed off the high beams as she helped Saskia brush down the therapy horses, a sound so ordinary it felt like victory. 3 months had passed since the wedding incident. November had arrived with cooler mornings and golden light that made the ranch look like something from a postcard. The stable was complete, operational, serving twice as many children in the therapeutic riding program. Juniper had appointed herself junior volunteer, greeting the younger kids with a confidence that still surprised me. She was gentle with the ones who were scared, patient when they asked the same questions 3 times. "Daddy, this one's name is Clover," she said, stroking the mare's nose. "She's really good with the little kids who are scared." "You're really good with them too," I said. Saskia smiled at me over Juniper's head. "She's been such a help. I think we found our junior volunteer." I watched my daughter show a nervous 7-year-old how to hold the brush, how to move with long, gentle strokes, how to read the horse's body language. Patient, kind, secure. This is what I protected. Not money, this. 3 months ago. I've been strategizing legal protections. Now I was watching my daughter teach kindness to anxious children. My mother arrived around noon, pulling up in her sedan with a bakery box balanced on the passenger seat. Fresh bread from her favorite place downtown, the one she'd been going to for 40 years. "The stable looks even better finished," she said, stepping out. "You can see it from the road now." That was the idea. I took the box from her. More visibility, more families finding us. We settled on the back porch with coffee, Saskia joining us while Juniper stayed in the stable organizing tack with the kind of focus only 7-year-olds possess. Lorraine sipped her coffee, looked out at the property. "I need to tell you something." I waited. "I was worried you were being too harsh," she said quietly. "With Roxanne, with the trust, moving so quickly, serving her papers at her wedding. I thought maybe you were being vindictive. And now I think you were being a father." She set down her cup. "There's a difference. I understand that now." Saskia reached over, squeezed my hand. "You think I did the right thing?" I asked. "I think you protected what matters," Lorraine said. "That's always right. I should have trusted your judgment from the start." The tightness I hadn't realized I was carrying in my chest loosened slightly. My mother's approval had always mattered, even when I was 46 years old and making decisions I knew were correct. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me for being slow," she smiled. "Thank Saskia for being patient with an old woman who needed time to see clearly." Lunch was simple sandwiches I'd made that morning. Fruit Saskia had cut. Lemonade Juniper had helped squeeze. The ease of it felt profound after months of tension. Juniper chattered about wanting to learn barrel racing. Saskia discussed plans to expand the program to include veterans. Lorraine shared neighborhood gossip about the Hendersons' new fence that was apparently 6 inches over the property line and causing drama. Normal. Boring. Perfect. Ordinary felt like treasure when you'd spent months fighting to keep it. "Grammy, did you know Daddy built the biggest stable in the whole valley?" Juniper asked around a mouthful of strawberry. Lorraine's eyes twinkled. "I heard that from a very reliable source at a very fancy wedding." Saskia laughed. "Don't remind him. He's still getting over the property tax increase." "Worth every penny," I said, and meant it. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, unknown number. Vegas area code, voicemail notification. "Excuse me a second," I said, stepping into the kitchen. I played the message. Roxanne's voice, careful and controlled. "Desmond, it's Roxanne. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I think we should talk, like adults, about what happened." A pause. A breath. "I understand now. About a lot of things. And I think we need to clear the air for everyone's sake. Especially for Juniper's. Especially for Juniper." Always the justification. Always someone else's name in her mouth to make it sound noble. I looked through the kitchen window at the porch. Saskia was refilling Lorraine's lemonade. Juniper was showing her grandmother something on her phone. Probably photos of the horses she'd taken that morning. Talk like adults. Clear the air. For Juniper's sake. All the right words. All the wrong reasons. Roxanne wanted closure. Or absolution. Or maybe just to feel like she still had some connection to this life. Some claim on my attention, my time, my consideration. But she'd signed the papers. She'd relinquished her claims. And I'd built something here that didn't include her. Didn't need her. Didn't want her shadow falling across it. Delete. One tap. That's all it took to close a door that had been open for years. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no curiosity about what she really wanted or how she was really doing. Just peace. The voicemail disappeared. The phone went back in my pocket. I grabbed the plate of cookies Saskia had set out earlier and walked back onto the porch. "Everything okay?" Saskia asked, reading my face the way she always could. "Everything's perfect," I said. "Who wants dessert?" Juniper's hand shot up. Lorraine laughed and reached for a cookie. Saskia watched me for another moment, then smiled and nodded. She understood. The way she always understood. We sat there as the afternoon stretched into evening, talking about nothing important, laughing at Juniper's stories about the therapy horses, making plans for Thanksgiving dinner next week. The ranch spread out around us, golden in the November light. The new stable stood solid and complete. The therapy program was growing. The trust was secure. My family was safe. As the sun started to sink toward the mountains, Juniper looked up from showing Lorraine photos. "Who was on the phone, Daddy?" I sat down between my wife and my daughter, reached for a cookie from the plate Saskia had set out, and said, "Nobody important." And I meant it. Saskia's hand found mine under the table. Lorraine met my eyes and smiled. Juniper went back to her photos, already forgetting she'd asked. The past was past. The door was closed. The only direction that mattered was forward. And forward looked bright. The desert sunset painted the stable walls the same gold it had 6 months ago.
But I watched it differently now. Not as a man bracing for battle, but as someone who'd already won by refusing to fight on someone else's terms. February in Nevada brought cooler evenings and longer shadows. I sat on the front porch, watching Juniper move among the therapy horses with easy confidence, crouching low to meet a nervous gelding's eye, murmuring something only the horse could hear, guiding a shaking new rider's hand to its neck without ever raising her voice. 6 months since the wedding incident. The ranch looked the same horses, same stable, same golden evening light. But I was different. We were different. The weight I'd carried, the constant vigilance, the waiting for Roxanne's next move gone. Peace isn't what you're born with. It's what you protect. 6 months ago, I was planning trust amendments and legal strategies. Now I was planning which horses to add to the program next spring, which grants to apply for, how to expand the veteran services Saskia had been researching. I'd learned something I wished I'd understood years ago. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're the clearest expression of love. Every no I gave Roxanne was a yes to Juniper. Every door I closed on manipulation was a window I opened to trust. Trust is a fence line. It keeps what matters in and what threatens out. People kept asking if I'd wanted revenge, if serving her papers at her own wedding felt satisfying, if watching her lose Preston brought me joy. I hadn't wanted revenge. I'd wanted peace. They're not the same thing. Revenge would have been gloating. Revenge would have been spreading word about what happened. Revenge would have been calling her back when she left that voicemail, just to tell her no. Peace was deleting the message and going back to my family. Peace was letting her consequences belong to her. Peace was building something so solid her chaos couldn't touch it. Roxanne had destroyed herself chasing status. I'd kept everything that mattered by knowing what status actually is. What is status anyway, if not being someone your child runs toward instead of away from? The trust had never been about money. It was about whose name gets written into the future, whose values get passed down, whose love gets preserved. Juniper would inherit the ranch someday, the therapy program, the protected acres. But more than that, she'd inherit the knowledge that she was chosen, protected, worth every legal filing, every difficult conversation, every door closed on someone who couldn't choose her. The porch boards creaked and Saskia stepped out, 2 beers in hand. She passed me one and sat beside me, her shoulder warm against mine. We watched the sunset in comfortable silence. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Saskia said. "You never let anger live in this house. You dealt with the threat and came back to us clean." "I had something worth coming back to," I said. She smiled, leaned her head against my shoulder. "Juniper asked me something today." "Yeah." She asked if she could change her last name legally when she turns 18. Make Caldwell official on her birth certificate, not just the adoption papers. Saskia's voice was soft. "She said it's already her real name. She just wants the paper to match." Something in my chest expanded and tightened at the same time. "What did you tell her?" I said yes. That she didn't have to wait until 18 if she didn't want to. That we could start the process any time. I couldn't speak for a moment, just nodded. Juniper wanted to be a Caldwell. Not because she had to be, because she chose to be. You can't buy chosen. You can't manipulate it or scheme for it. You can only earn it, day by day, by being someone worth choosing. That was perfect, I managed. That was exactly right. Always. The only promise that ever mattered. From the stable, Juniper's voice rang out clear and bright. "Daddy, Mommy, come see Clover's being so gentle with the new kid." Pure joy. Unburdened by drama that had swirled around her but never touched her. She didn't know about courtrooms or trust amendments. She knew about horses who trusted her, and children who needed gentleness, and parents who came when she called. I stood,
Offered Saskia my hand. Shall we? She took it. Always. We walked toward the stable together, our shadows stretching long across the desert dirt. Behind us, the sun dropped below the horizon. Ahead, our daughter waited, laughing, surrounded by horses who knew only kindness and children who knew only safety. The therapy program would grow. The ranch would expand. Juniper would learn and thrive, and someday tell her own children about the place where her real life began. Roxanne would become a footnote, a name Juniper barely remembered. But this, the stable, the horses, the family, the peace this would last. I'd protected it. We'd protected it. Protection isn't about walls or weapons. It's about knowing what matters enough to guard it, and then having the courage to guard it anyway. The loop was closed. The battle was won. Not with anger or revenge, with boundaries, with patience, with love that knew when to say no so it could keep saying yes. Juniper grabbed my hand as we reached the stable, pulled me toward Clover's stall where a nervous 8-year-old was carefully brushing the mare's mane. See? Daddy, see how gentle she's being? I saw everything we'd fought for. Everything we'd protected. Everything we'd built. The ranch. The trust. The family. The future. Standing there with my wife's hand in one of mine and my daughter's in the other, watching a frightened child find courage through a gentle horse. I understood. This was victory. Not in courtrooms or legal documents, but in ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they were safe. Because they were ours. Because they were chosen and protected and real. The sun slipped below the desert horizon. The stable lights came on, warm and golden. Juniper laughed, explaining to the young rider how to move the brush in long, gentle strokes. Saskia squeezed my hand, and I knew. With the kind of certainty that comes from fighting for something and winning by refusing to become something you're not, that this was exactly where I was meant to be, protecting what mattered, living well, chosen and choosing, home. And to you listening to my story, remember this. For years, I thought protecting what mattered meant building higher walls. I learned that real protection isn't about keeping everyone out. It's about knowing what's worth guarding and having the courage to set boundaries. Don't wait until the threat is at your door. Act early, act clearly, and never apologize for choosing your family's peace over someone else's greed. This isn't really a revenge story, even though it might sound like one. Revenge is about making someone suffer. What I did was about keeping my daughter safe. There's a difference. I believe God put me through this to teach me that sometimes love looks like saying no. The best response to someone who chooses money over people isn't anger. It's building something so good they can't touch it. Live well. Protect what matters. Trust that boundaries aren't walls. They're the fence lines that keep the people you love safe. If my revenge story, or really, my story about choosing protection over revenge, resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary to protect someone you love? Share this story with anyone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Dad's Pure Revenge. God bless you. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. A final reminder, some details in this story were fictionalized to emphasize the lesson. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. What I hope you take away is the message that protecting what you love isn't cruelty, it's courage.